All right, hey, it's Rob. Good morning. It's a lovely, crisp fall morning in Atlanta, Georgia, beginning of October 2025. I revisit the topic of the Guidestones on occasion. If I learn any new information, I have anything to share, this video is called Putting the Pieces Together. And of course, literally, the Guidestones are still resting in pieces, having been blown up 2022, a few years back. And they're in storage in a warehouse somewhere. I tried to go find, out where that warehouse was. Of course, it is in Elberton, Georgia, where the Guidestones stood. It's still a controversial topic. At some point, they will probably display what is left of the Guidestones to do some kind of memorial to them at the Elbert County Granite Association Museum. And I've been there and did an interview with the guy that worked there. You can search out all this different content on my channel that I've done on the Guidestones over the last few years. If you're new to the topic, you don't even know what I'm talking about. The Georgia Guidestones were 4 18-foot tall panels. They kind of looked like Stonehenge, and they were set up in the middle of a cow pasture in Elberton, Georgia, which happens to be pretty much the granite capital of at least the eastern part of the United States. Traditionally, most people, when they're buried with a headstone that was quarried in the area of Elberton. These days, China, and there's been other competition, but that is their main industry there in Elbert County, is quarrying the granite. I have a song called Elberton Granite, which is just basically saying, hey, we're all going to end up under that Elberton Granite someday. Anyway, so the Georgia Guidestones were a mysterious monument built by unknown persons, or a person, and I have my opinion on that, and many people do as well. And they basically were a set of instructions that said, hey, the world has been blown up. The world is in pieces. Unfortunately, the Guidestones ended up in pieces. The world is still here for now. But, hey, we've had a nuclear event or whatever, and these are instructions to rebuild society. And that's basically what the Guidestones represented. A lot of people got a lot of different ideas about the New World Order and about, who knows what, the time travel and aliens and Area 51 and satanic rituals, all sorts of crazy stuff. And, somebody ended up just, deciding that the world would be better off without the Guidestones, and blew them up one night. Probably inspired by this politician whose name was Candace Taylor, who said if she was elected governor, she was running for governor. She lost by, a huge amount, but or maybe she didn't even make the primary. I don't remember what happened with her. But anyway, she basically said, we should blow up the Guidestones, for religious reasons. They're evil, they're satanic, and somebody took it to heart and actually did that. So at some point, they'll probably be back on display at the Granite Museum in Elbert County once all the furor kind of dies down. And it's been a few years, and it'd be nice to see them again. I went to search for them at some point there and interviewed a guy at the museum, and he wasn't really willing to share their current location. Anyway, so here's what I found out. I spoke to a guy, and he grew up in Fort Dodge, Iowa. That's important because most people think the person responsible, or most responsible, for the building of the Guidestones was a doctor in Fort Dodge, Iowa. His name was Herbert Kersten. I've made other videos about him, and other people have as well. A documentary pretty much determined that, he was the guy corresponding with the banker who, helped fund pay for the building of the Georgia Guidestones. And this was 1980, of course. It was all secret. The person who built the Guidestones wanted to remain anonymous, and has all this time. But a couple people had to know at least, his pseudonym, who he was, and eventually, I think, probably determined, what the real person's name was. It was kind of outed in a documentary, like I said, a few years ago, and most people believe that and I do as well. This one man, Dr. Herbert Kersten in Fort Dodge, Iowa, was the man behind the Georgia Guidestones. Now, what I learned yesterday from speaking to a local Fort Dodge resident, and also he pointed me out to a podcast, and the podcast said a bunch of way out there stuff about little gray men in Area 51 and, all that stuff. And, my whole perspective is the Georgia Guidestones were a very unique roadside oddity. They were the vision of this one man, Herbert Kersten, even though he said he represented a group of people. But I think that he probably said that to make himself look more legitimate, because what one person would go spend $100,000 to make a monument in 8 different languages and put it out in the middle of a field. But like I said, putting together the pieces, the name of this video, it's starting to make sense to me because of what I learned about Dr. Kersten's wartime service. I cannot verify it, just like we cannot verify that Dr. Kersten was the man who built the Guidestones. Anyway, so I talked to this resident of Fort Dodge. He grew up with the sons of Dr. Kersten. He, said I should listen to this podcast and that he had heard some similar things. And basically, 6 minutes into this video, what I learned was Dr. Kersten's experience during the war. He spent time in Japan, supposedly, and it's, not that far-fetched to imagine that maybe he was there and saw firsthand the effects of, the radiation when the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He may have been there or been around that area, afterwards, and maybe he saw victims or maybe treated victims who were exposed to radiation. This is what I'm hearing. Again, there's no way to independently determine if this is true, but he definitely was a doctor. He definitely was in the war. He definitely was overseas. And so if it is the case that he is in fact a person who has firsthand experience of people who, were affected by the atomic bomb dropping in Japan, this just makes even more sense that, hey, this guy has seen firsthand the damage that an atomic bomb can do on a society, what it can do to people, how it affects their health, how it, of course, totally destroys a society and they have to rebuild from the ground up. If that really was his experience, and that's what, this podcast and this person I spoke to were mentioning about his wartime experience, if that's the case, then, hey, isn't he, a likely suspect for a guy who's going to go build a monument and say, hey, if we have a nuclear event in the United States, I've seen it firsthand, I've seen what it does, I've seen the effects as a doctor on the health of the people, who are exposed to radiation. And I'm going to make this big monument in a field and say, if we need to rebuild society, these are the things we need to do. We need to think about controlling the population, and we need to think about how we, can resolve our disputes amicably, and, what we do, to have a common language and we can all understand each other. And this is a new world that we're going to be rebuilding out of the ashes of what's left after the country gets obliterated. Now, don't forget, this was 1980. There was a lot of nuclear panic during that time. There were popular movies like The Day After, which really scared a lot of people, which just showed a nuclear bomb blowing up in America and, all the effects and what it would be like to try to survive an event like that. And, there was a lot of music that, You Dropped a Bomb on Me, but other songs as well, mentioning nuclear war. I Melt With You, modern English song, is basically about, two people dying in a nuclear war and, fusing together. I don't want to get any kind of more graphic than that, but so it was in the culture. It was being spoken about a lot back then. I don't think we're in any better place now. We just have gotten on with it and we don't obsess about it anymore, but to that degree at least. Anyway, in the 1980s, early 1980s, and that's when the Guidestones were built, that's what was on people's minds. So, here's a doctor. Apparently he was pretty well off. I heard from this person I spoke to that his kids inherited a lot of money. He ran a clinic in Fort Dodge, and I think 3 of his sons were also doctors. So, they just, whatever. had a very successful business. They were prominent people in their community, and he earned enough money. He had these strong viewpoints. He would write a lot of letters to the editor. There are many of these you can find online where he commented on various issues relating to population explosion and a lot of things that carry over to what we see on the Guidestones. So if you add all this together, of course he does seem like the guy, and even more likely now that if his war service did include exposure to people who saw the effects of the atomic bomb firsthand, and that would scare anyone or give anyone pause to think, hey, especially if you're a doctor, like, this is really going to be a serious event in our society, and what can we do to rebuild if it happens? And that's what might have inspired him to build those monuments out there that are sitting in pieces in a warehouse, but maybe one day will rise again from the ashes. We will find out. There's a lot of other crazy stuff. Of course, people say, someone said he went to Area 51, and, everyone's been to Area 51, apparently. Actually, I have been to Area 51. Pardon me, getting over a cold. Area 51 is pretty boring. It's a black mailbox, literally, sitting in the middle of the desert, and a hill that you can't see anything over. And you sit out there and, try to watch UFOs land or whatever, but you basically just sit out there and nothing goes on. I was there working on a documentary, and people did show up, at Area 51 and sat there, and one person tried to drive down the road about 10 feet and was immediately turned around by these black Suburbans that will protect the property. You can get arrested there pretty easy. Anyway, so there's not going to ever be any way to prove, Dr. Kersten's involvement in aliens, Area 51, all that stuff. But, it stands to reason that if he was in Japan during the end of World War II, he may have experienced something that may have influenced him to want to build these monuments in Georgia. Simple as that. All right, that's the update for late fall 2025. If we learn more, and maybe we will someday, who knows? I'll get out of here and share it again. Take care.